My guest at this time is Ilan Berman, Vice President at the American Foreign Policy Council. We want to get his reaction to the latest round of sanctions President Trump is applying against Iran, the impact those sanctions might have, and how Iran is likely to respond. And Ilan, thanks so much for being with us.
Oh, good to be back, as always.
Well, there's already been quite a few sanctions applied against Iran. What specifically is Trump doing here?
Right. So I think the big takeaway here from the latest round of sanctions is effectively twofold. The first is that this is an attempt by the administration to hit back at Iran for its escalation of tensions in the Persian Gulf, but do so in a non-military fashion. There's been a lot of ink spilled in the media about how President Trump is rushing to war, but it's very clear that he doesn't prefer military confrontation. He wants Iran to pay, but he wants Iran to pay in a way that doesn't escalate actual physical hostilities. The second macro trend here is that this is a very shrewd move by the administration because it plays on a fault line that is very visible within Iran, but much less so outside. Ordinary Iranians understand very well that the Supreme Leader and the unelected clergy that run Iran have enriched themselves tremendously at the expense of ordinary people. There have been reports on the hidden financial empire of Iran's Supreme Leader and of his cronies, and by applying sanctions, these sanctions and the ones that are coming in just a few days against top regime leaders, the administration is trying to widen that rift that exists between the Iranian people and the Iranian leadership by highlighting just how corrupt that leadership is.
How much pain will those unelected mullahs and Hassan Rouhani and his ilk, who actually were part of the elected government and are, how much pain will they feel as a result of this latest round, do you think?
That's a good question. It's clear that the Iranian leadership is feeling a pretty substantial amount of pain already. The Iranian economy is in a very pronounced downward spiral. The Iranian clerical army, the Revolutionary Guards, which are insinuated into virtually every economic sector in Iran, have been hit directly by U.S. sanctions. And so this is intended not as a killing blow, but it's certainly intended as an amplifying effect for the sanctions that have come before. And the goal here is remains consistent with what the administration has been trying to do all along, which is to dial up the pressure, dial up the economic pain to the Iranian regime until it comes back to the negotiating table. And here the administration has been very clear. The president said he's willing to negotiate with the Iranians, but he's not willing to countenance Iran continuing to do bad things while we negotiate. So all of this is intended not to collapse the regime or to overthrow the regime, but all of this is intended is to make the regime force it into a choice where it chooses between the potential collapse or the necessity for some sort of compromise with the United States.
How do you expect the Iranians to respond here, whether it's inside that choice or in some other way? Because President Hassan Rouhani has said that these latest sanctions mean the chance for diplomacy is over. So what do you think they have in mind?
Yeah, I actually think it means exactly the opposite, because it's very clear that the Iranian leadership has been empowered over the last couple of years by the permissive atmosphere that was created by the 2015 nuclear deal. So the way the Trump administration is looking at it, job one is to roll back that permissive environment. And it's doing that by, first and foremost, removing the amount of money that Iran has to do bad things in the region. Beyond that, the Iranian regime can talk a very good talk about how it's not willing to negotiate. But the weaker the Iranian economy becomes, the more rickety the rule of the Ayatollahs becomes, the more likely they are to decide that even if they are diminished politically and diminished in terms of credibility, they still want to remain in business, so they better talk to Washington.
So in the end here, do you think Trump approving the attack and then pulling back, and now this latest round of sanctions, is likely to decrease Iranian mischief in the region in terms of, like we saw with the drone attack and the tanker attacks and other things in the last few weeks?
Well, candidly, I think they're two separate things. The president's 11th hour move to pull back and not carry out military strikes on the Iranian regime or on regime targets was, I think, a fairly complicated and mixed message, because it really did a substantial amount of damage to American deterrence credibility, right? Because it sent a signal that the Iranian regime can attack American assets in the region and not face concrete consequences. These sanctions are certainly a substitute response, and they're a potent response. But there is still the fear that because in all of these sort of scenarios, the adversary gets a vote, Iran may continue to dial up the military tension in the Gulf in a way that we simply can't respond to just with sanctions.
A lot to watch for. Ilan, I have a feeling we'll be talking again soon. Thanks very much for your time today.
Oh, my pleasure.
Ilan Berman is the Vice President of the American Foreign Policy Council. I'm Greg Corombos reporting for Radio America.